Fantasy baseball can be very annoying because when you look at each of the categories for fantasy scoring and the top 10 players in each of them, you'll see some of the same names keep popping up in every category. These are the elite top 10 players in the league, and you really have to have one or more of them in order to have a chance of winning the championship. It becomes even more frustrating if you play dynasty baseball because once someone has one of these players, there is no chance they will give them up in any trade whatsoever. And so today we're going to try to look at what are the statistics we can use and the metrics we should look at to try to predict who has the best chance of becoming the next elite top 10 players that we should get earlier ahead of other people, and what really matters when it comes to identifying people that can contribute in scoring in these categories. Subscribe to this channel if you want to win fantasy baseball. We're going to use the data and analytics to try to help you win as much as possible. And today we're trying to answer the question of what do we need to look at to identify elite players? And you can see here from the 2025 top 10 categories, runs, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases, average, and on base percentage, the number of times that Aaron Judge, so Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, Kyle Schwarber, Cal Raleigh even last year with a fantastic year pop up in these categories is ridiculous, especially if you look at Aaron Judge. He was number 2 in runs scored. He was number 4 in home runs. And then he was number 5 in RBI, number 1 in batting average, and number 1 in on-base percentage. So if you had Aaron Judge in your team, you had a really good chance of winning. And obviously, people are unlikely to help you by trading that player away. So let's look at some of the stats. I am very confident in my ability to use StatCast to tease out really good fantasy baseball players versus really bad fantasy baseball players, but it still remains a challenge to identify the metrics that will show you who has the best chance for that high ceiling elite top 10 player that we all want to have on our teams. And let's look in the data. And I'm doing this from a fantasy perspective. So we're looking at the scoring categories that you must get, and I looked at data to correlate what metric can I find that best correlates to how I can look at someone that's going to score lots of runs, hit lots of home runs, produce lots of RBI, which can be very complicated, and so forth and so on. So let's take a look and see what we have. So the best metric I could find by looking and analyzing some data of predicting how many runs someone will score, and this makes total sense from a high level and also from a stats basis, is on-base percentage. Obviously makes total sense. When you get yourself on base, you become, road traffic that someone's going to eventually knock you in. Certainly some variation in this because it depends on where you hit in your lineup. Guys who are at the top of the lineup obviously have more opportunities for runs with better hitters behind them, and also depends on your lineup overall. It makes a big difference whether they're playing for the Yankees or the Dodgers, or they're playing for Pittsburgh or someone like that, where there's just less opportunities for you to score runs. But on average, if you were to look at one metric that best correlates with your chance of finding someone who can contribute in the runs category, it is on-base percentage. So that's something we're going to really look at and earmark. And please keep in mind, especially look in the minors, you can see there's a huge pack here where the average is. I think the average on-base percentage is somewhere around 330 in the majors, so you're going to get a big pack there. And you can see once you really get above 350 or even anywhere near 400, it really thins out to just the elite contributors in these categories. And these are the type of people we want. We're not just looking for, ahead of the pack. We're looking for the breakout elite players that have contribute significantly outside of these average players. And that's next metric we want to look at is home runs. And I do this by looking at home runs per game and runs per game, because obviously when you're trying to model fantasy baseball data, it can get even more wonky with some people playing 140 games, some people playing 160 games to try to just trust your rough on-base percentage metric or something like that to showing that data. And we get a better overall correlation here, but still a huge leverage plot between home runs per game and your ISO. ISO is your isolated power. We'll go into that another time. It's on the StatCast. It's basically your slugging percentage minus your batting average. So what are you actually contributing in the extra bases kind of categories? And so this one, it shows again here a huge pack in the middle. Once you get an ISO above 250, and really ideally you'll see 300, where the elite players are, then that is where you can significantly expect to have a huge amount of home runs per game. Obviously 0.25 home runs per game, if you played about 160 games, would be the 40 plus home run territory. So that's the type of players we want to look at. So above, really 250 ISO can get you about a good chance of hitting 40 home runs if you stay healthy within the whole year. And I think what's also really helpful about this, so we're on the on-base percentage and ISO are things we're going to start to look at for these metrics. Obviously, there's so much behind the scene to see whether they'll produce as you look at the StatCast data, which we always talk about, but what are the things that you can look at as you hunt for minor league players or rookies or guys who are potentially breaking out that can find these elite players, see if they have a true ceiling. This isn't just about good fantasy production. This is finding how high up is your actual ceiling for these players. Now, next one that's good is, which also makes sense, is if you want to, what's the best predictor of having RBI, and it's actually having a lot of home runs or home runs per game, because we obviously make sense. The more home runs you hit, the more runs you drive in. So therefore, I think the two stats we can give you is on base percentage drives runs, and your ISO drives not only home runs but also with it RBI. So I think those are two helpful metrics. And if you happen to be like myself in a non-base percentage league versus batting average, now you've just identified two metrics that can help you really improve in four categories. Obviously, stolen bases can be a totally different thing to look at. And if you're in a batting average league, the most important thing I saw in batting average to get in covered is obviously a low strikeout rate. So someone who doesn't strike out a whole lot is putting the ball in play, and they get a better chance to having a higher batting average. Whereas on base percentage leagues, your walk rate is obviously becomes super important. So now let's take a look at this as well. So looking at what are the players from last year in 2025 that had the highest ISO and highest on-base percentage. And of course, it's all these names again, even more so. Aaron Judge, Cal Raleigh, Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber, Eugenio Suarez popped up in here. These are the players that you wanted to have because their ISOs were super high, above 300. These are the elite players. You know, Suarez was just right at it, just under it, but at 300 ISO and above in the majors. And then for on-base percentage, Aaron Judge, George Springer had an amazing year. Juan Soto, Shohei Ohtani, all these guys were near 400 or above 400 on-base percentage. So I think these are the metrics we want to look at is how close can you get to identifying a hitter with a 300 ISO and ideally with it a 400 on-base percentage. If you have both of those things together, that is some of the best metrics to hopefully predict whether a player will contribute in both of those league categories and potentially be a 4-category stud for your team, depending on your standings. So let's take a look. These are the highest ISOs, but obviously go back to what I just showed you in the beginning. How's that translating to home runs? Well, obviously there's Cal Raleigh, number 2 ISO. There's Kyle Schwarber, number 4 ISO. Shohei Ohtani, number 3 ISO. Aaron Judge, number 1 ISO. Eugenio Suarez, number 5 ISO. So depending on health and all those things, the top 5 guys in ISO were the top 5 guys in home runs. And then you go to RBIs because home runs bring RBIs. You've got Kyle Schwarber, who's number 4 in ISO. You got Pete Alonso, who actually popped up there, and he was just off the top 10 and number 12. Cal Raleigh, obviously, is number 2. Eugenio Suarez is number 5. Aaron Judge, who's number 1, and so forth. So these are the guys that you want to have on your teams, and obviously the team context is going to matter. But if you find guys with a high ISO, and then that can contribute to home runs and RBIs. If you find players with a decent or above average on base percentage, that can help you win runs. So this can help us not only identifying true breakout players in the majors already, guys who could take the next step and become the elite players as they hit their peak years in age 27, but also I'm starting to use this to look at minor leaguers and see who has the potential in the minor leagues to contribute a high ISO with a high on base percentage. Obviously, all those risks become a projection, what team they end up with, and how they adjust to Major League Baseball. But that is the game to play. It's not going to be a perfect science, but what are the 2 metrics that we can find that gives us the best chance of identifying top 10 elite talent? Now, let's look at this retroactively. So Nick Kurtz last year flew through the minor leagues, came up to the majors, and had an outstanding season. But let's look for some signals. In 2025, in the minors as a total, Nick Kurtz had an just ungodly 356 ISO with a 400 right on the nose on base percentage. In fact, if you look at all the other, even the year before that in 2024, just after getting drafted, he had a 395 ISO and a 520 on base percentage. So that translated obviously into huge WRC pluses. So he had both of those signals. So this is someone that I'm really banking on for the future, especially playing next few years in a minor league ballpark. I really like Nick Kurtz, and if he just matures and lower these strikeout rates a little bit at all, it's going to really help him, right? So you can see what he did when he came up into the majors. So he had 36 home runs, he had 90 runs, 86 RBIs, and his on-base percentage in the majors was 383. Some would say, well, how could you have predicted that? It was actually there in his minor league stats. The only question was, how would he adjust to major league pitching to produce at the same level as he was in the minors? Now, you'll hear people knocking on him, even in draft rankings this year of where to slot Nick Kurtz. People were saying, oh, his strikeout rate a little bit high. It was, in the mid 20s in the minors and 30% in the majors. That's a high risk. I'm here to tell you, if you've watched some other videos, a high strikeout rate for a true power hitter doesn't really matter as much, as long as when they hit the ball, they're still producing. If the ISOs are high, and he makes up for it with a high walk rate, so that's not something that worries me. That was the knock on Aaron Judge all the way up through the minors, and Aaron Judge has made a living off of it, even with his strikeout rates, above 30% at times. I know he's gotten it down into like mid 20s, which is still relatively high. But if you are a true masher, you can overcome a higher than strikeout rate than we would like, just because when you do impact the ball, it is significant, and that's why we look for a high ISO, and obviously get on base with an on-base percentage, which pitchers have to work around you if you're going to hit all those home runs. So far this year, he's off to a colder start. He doesn't actually have any home runs at the time of recording. His walk rate's still good, but his strikeout rate is 40%, so his ISO is down, but his on-base percentage is still a solid 360. So I have no doubt in that minor league ballpark, when it starts to warm up and balls start flying, that he will actually significantly improve. And Nick Kurtz is still someone that I'm looking at long-term to be a potentially super elite ball player, especially in that ballpark. Now look at someone like Roman Anthony for the Boston Red Sox. In total, in the minor leagues, before coming up with the Red Sox, in 2024, he had a 207 ISO and a 398 on base percentage. So this is one we got to see where the top is, because he is already hitting the metrics we'd want, near a 400 on base percentage in the minors, but his ISO has never really been super high. It's been near 200. I would say, we said 200, 250s where you start to break out into that elite category, and he's been a little bit lower than that. Even when he came up to the majors last year, he did fairly well. He had 8 home runs. He had a 13% walk rate, so his on-base percentage in the majors did translate at 396, but he had a 171 ISO. So this is someone we need to look at to see he has one of the signals, but not two. But let's see if he can continue to grow in his power, because that's really going to determine whether or not he becomes elite or just stays a really solid, amazing player. And as a Red Sox fan, I'm super happy that he is on the team. So far this year, he has only 1 home run, and his ISO is only 130, but his on-base percentage is still a pretty solid 350, so there's still time for him to grow. Now let's take a look at someone who struggled with this, Charlie Condon. So coming into the draft, at least especially in my dynasty draft, the big talk was, where do you slot Charlie Condon versus Jack Caglianone versus Nick Kurtz, and who had the higher ceiling and all that kind of stuff. And obviously Charlie Condon in Colorado is a super tempting asset to get in that ballpark. But you can see when he got drafted, he came in and started hitting. He had an ISO below 100 and on-base percentage of 250. So he really struggled, and he didn't have either of those signals in the minors, whereas you can see from Nick Kurtz's data, it was all green lights from day one in the minors. Now you come to 2025 and how he did in the minors, and there's some improvement in 175 ISO, and then a little bit better 376 on-base percentage. So there is showing signs of hope here for him as well. And now in Colorado in AAA, he has his ISO is now 286. On-base percentage is 405. So I think these are starting to be signals, if he can keep it up, that Charlie Condon is someone you need on your radar, because even though he struggled to produce in the minors, and some people are kind of fading him based on that, he is starting to show signs of breaking out. He is slower and behind the curve of Nick Kurtz, but he is someone you should definitely watch. And, I know he was a sleeper coming into this year, because he's starting to show both signals of having a high ISO and a high on-base percentage in the majors, and that's someone I'm watching, and you should try to see if he's still available in some of your leagues, especially if you have keepers for redraft or a true dynasty. And dynasty, I know he had probably taken pretty early with all the hype. Colt Emerson, who really made his way through the minors last year, but he doesn't quite have it yet. You can see most of his minors, his ISO has been around below 200, 113, 173. All of 2025, his ISO was a combined 174, but his on-base percentage is getting close to there, 383. So he's one who has some potential, because his on-base percentage has always been fantastic. However, we need to see if the power will truly come, which has kind of always been the question for him, especially as he decides whether he can stick at shortstop or third base. But he's someone to keep an eye on, because he definitely has some potential, but we got to see what he can do as far as improving his power. Next, we have Aiden Miller with the Philadelphia Phillies, also a prospect breakout in 2025. Throughout 2025, Aiden Miller had a 169 ISO and a 392 on base percentage. So similar to Colt Emerson, he has the on base percentage part covered, but the ISO we're waiting to see if the power will truly come and really get him above that 250 mark that we really need to see if he's going to stick out. So, but a lot of you are probably saying, hey, these are previous people who are already taken either in redraft keepers or dynasty leagues because they broke out in 2025. And that definitely, let's take a look at other prospects and see who we can find as well. One I've been talking for a while has been Ryan Clifford. Through 2025, he had a 233 ISO, so very close there to the mark we need, and a 356 on base percentage, going all the way up to AAA with the Mets. He is off to a slow start this year, only 300 on base percentage and below below 100 ISO, but he's one to keep an eye on because he's shown the potential to have both marks, high ISO 233 and high on base percentage as well. If we go back just to 2024, what he did in total, he had a 193 ISO and a 372 on base percentage. So if he can continue to develop, he's one that may have an opportunity to kind of reach both of those marks at the same time. Next, as surprised, it was Ryan Waldschmidt as I looked into this. So he's always been kind of touted as a 2020 outfielder with some potential, but in so far in all of 2025, he had a 184 ISO and a 419 on base percentage. So you can see a lot of these great contact hitters that we see, the on base percentage is not a problem. They could be good run scoring players, but it's the ISO we need to see if they can truly develop into that top elite tier of home runs and RBIs. So far in 2026, so he's really upped his ISO to 231 and his on-base percentage of 429. So Ryan Waldschmidt is certainly someone to keep an eye on, and there's a chance he can get called up at some time this year if they have any more injuries in that outfield. Next is Chase DeLauder. Obviously, you could say he kind of already broke out, but through obviously the question with him has always been health. So his ISO in 2025 was 209, on base percentage was 379. But you can see so far this year, as he's breaking out in the majors live, as we can see, his ISO is 386. His on base percentage is a solid 340. We'd like to see that tick a little bit higher, but you can see the potential there for Chase DeLauder to really step up his game and be that kind of combo high ISO, high on base percentage player. So far in just 13 games, he's got 5 home runs, 11 RBIs. So in 13 games, 11 RBIs and 9 runs with 5 home runs. He is on track to, with a 340 on base percentage, he's on track to being a 4 category monster so far this year. We got to see if he can keep it up. But this is the type of player that we've been looking at, and that's why I'm willing to ignore the injury history that kind of drove a lot of people away from Chase DeLauder, because if he's healthy, he's got everything else you need, all the tools you need to be a breakout superstar. Now, I don't know if he's going to be a top 10 player this year, but so far he's been one of the best players in the majors. We could have seen it coming in 2025, even with the small base size. His ISO was above 200, on base percentage was 379. Next for this year, so let's look at guys potentially who are kind of breaking out potential for this year. Spencer Jones, kind of a post-hype prospect. He struggled a little bit in some of the early minors, but he's starting to get kind of really pull it together. And I know that this is one everyone's worried about his strikeout rate. You can see here 36%. So for 2025, his total strikeout percentage was 35%. So everybody's down on him, saying, "Oh, he's going to be terrible. You can't sustain that." But he's almost a 300 ISO and a 362 on base percentage, even with that high strikeout rate. And so far this year, he's got a 220 ISO, 340 on base percentage. Yes, the strikeout rate's even higher to 42%. And this is the type of tool set that let other people be afraid of the strikeout rates. But if he can continue to improve in his ISO and on base percentage, any minor improvement and his strikeout rate will catapult him to elite production, kind of like O'Neal Cruz. So these are the types of players we need to keep an eye on that other people are overlooking. As well as Max Clark, he's getting a lot of buzz as well with Detroit for his performance so far. But in 2025, he had a 160 ISO and a 403 on base percentage. So you can see it's pretty easy to find some guys with pretty good on base percentage, especially in the minors, who can contribute to runs. But to find the elite guys with a high ISO, he's improved it so far in AAA in 2026 to 217 and obviously 491 on base percentage. It's still early in the year, but we're going to keep an eye on Max Clark to see if he can make some more strides in his power game as well. And finally, someone I may have to eat some crow on if you see my other videos, Kevin McGonigal. The question with him has always been how much power will show up being 5'9" and his type of profile. However, you can see in 2025, based on these two metrics, he had a 278 ISO and a 408 on base percentage. So yes, you could say maybe he only had 19 home runs because he was hitting a lot of doubles, but his production was excellent with 68 runs, 80 RBIs, 10 stolen bases, and his strikeout rate's only 11%. So far in the majors, obviously how it translates, he's got a 135 ISO, but a 373 on base percentage. So we always knew he's going to be a solid guy depending on where they hit him in the lineup. He could be a high run producer with that high on base percentage if they put him in the early part of the lineup. But we really need to see if will the power come in and will it really translate into home runs and RBIs. Whereas right now he does have 7 RBIs in just 14 games, so that's on pace for like 80 for a year. But we need to see if the home runs will really come, because obviously you can really get a very high ISO by hitting a ton of doubles and not a whole lot of home runs. So these are the two metrics I think you guys need to pay attention to on the prospects. Ignore all the noise of strikeout rates, ignore the health thing. If you had to pick two metrics that'll help you monitor how someone is doing versus becoming a potentially elite talent, now it all depends on how they come up and how they perform and adjust to Major League pitching. But these are the things I'm going to be watching for prospects to see who I want to take my bets on, because they're not all going to hit, but some of them will help you win your fantasy team. Subscribe to this channel if you want to win your fantasy baseball team, and check out this video because YouTube says you'll like it next.